Hi, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the daily Rambam Shiur, lesson 126, 127, and 128. We will be covering the Hilchos Terumot from chapter 1 until chapter 9. The source of the rules of Terumot comes from the Torah, from three different parshas. First of all, the primary rules of Terumot specifically are in Parsha Shoftim, which we read 2 weeks ago. However, many of the details that surrounding to the details of Terumos and Maisos and Matnos Kehuno, they are derived from Parshas Korach. Everybody is well aware of the commentary of Rashi right at the beginning of the introduction of the 24 gifts that each and every Kohen is entitled to. And he gives the following example. Moshe Melech, it was once an example to a king who gifted a field to his friend, and he was not certifying properly the gift. And then came someone and appealed upon the gift, and therefore, if someone again will come and appeal about the gift, I'm going to give you and recertify you this actual contract, so no one in the future will be able to refute the validity of this gift. Same way until Korach came and he appealed the actual legitimacy of the Kehuno in general. So after the struggle with Korach, God Almighty have reinforced the legitimacy of the gifts of the Matnos Kehuno by the introduction of the obligation of each and every one to give Terumot from his produce and the rights of the Kohanim to go and collect them. Many times the Rabbi used to mention, based on the halacha, that in order to define a shtar as a very reliable and a proper, so amongst the way to validate a shtar is only a shtar that yotzo olav iruv and iskayem b'chisomov, if a shtar was under an appeal, and despite the appeal were managed to validate and to certify those witnesses and the validity of the shtar, so such a shtar has a strong reliability and credit way over other type of shtaris. And in fact, Be'ashgocha Potis, right now we are in the days of Chodesh Elul, which are Yemei HaTshuva ve'Harachmim. And basically the idea of Tshuva in general is to reinforce the original tie that were broken, but after it's being retied again, so the connection and the bond is way stronger than it was before. Interestingly also, that right now we are in the period of Melech Basode, and we are covering in the Rambam the rules that are relating to a Sode. And we started with Hilchos Kilaim, and right now we are being introduced to the rule of Terumot. The word in Terumot in Lashon Kodesh is derived from the Shoresh, from the roots of Haromo, a upgrade, a type of fruit or harvest that was until now defined as tevel, forbidden to eat, via the act of giving a certain percentage to the Kohen. So what was tevel becomes right now chulin, permitted chulin, and a part of it that was given to the Kohen is being upgraded to a level of Terumot, which must be kept under very strict condition in order for the Kohen to benefit properly. There is also a very strong connection to the word Terumot, to this particular times of the year. Terumot consists also of two words, Torah Mem, the Torah which was given after 40 days, which started on Rosh Chodesh Elul and concluded on Yom Kippurim, which then was the Matan Torah of the Luchos Shniyos, those Luchos that are lasted till today. So exactly Be'ashgocha Protis, while these are the days of the Mem Yom that the Torah was given on them, we happen to cover the rules of Terumot. So the first chapter of the Rambam is devoted to define the proper location and the proper condition that the Terumot will be valid biblically, midoraisa. So to sum it up in one sentence, in order for a Terumot to be defined as a biblical Terumot, must be three conditions met. Condition number one, that this particular land must be from this territory that was promised to our forefathers. Condition number two, it must be occupied via or a king or a judge or a prophet with the consent of the majority of the Jewish people. And condition number three, that Kol Yoshvei Oleo, all the tribes, all the Jews must be residing on this land. Until these three conditions are met, so the level of Terumot is not Deoraisa. It will be or Derabanan, or it will be entirely exempt from the idea of Terumot in general. In Israel itself, can be two types of a occupation. One type of occupation is what we called Kibush Rabim, which established the land of Israel as Israel, and it was done by Mei Yehoshua. And then can be what is called a Kibush Yochid. Kibush Yochid can be done by two ways, or Kishmoi Kain, who by individual who has done an occupation but it was not Midas Roiv Israel, or even in a case that it was done by a legit body, like in this case by Dovid HaMelech, with the go-ahead of Roiv Israel and obviously with full support and legitimacy. However, the order of the occupation was the wrong order, because a certain territory was occupied by him before he managed to occupy this promised land that God Almighty promised to our forefathers. So given the fact that he have prioritized something that should be postponed, for that reason the territory of Syria that he occupied in this time has a gray area. On one hand, since he was after all occupying, it cannot be defined as Chutz La'oretz. On the other hand, since he was doing it not in the proper order, it's being defined as a Kibush Yochid, and therefore it has certain implication about the sanctity of these particular fruits that are being separated and designated over there as Terumos and Maasros, as we will soon going to see. Then outside Israel, though biblically it is entirely exempt. However, according to a multi-stage institution started by the prophets and later on instituted by the rabbis, the countries of Egypt, Babylonia, Ammon, and Moav, they have added territories that the chiyuv, the obligation, the duty of Terumot and Maasros over there are rabbinical. Though that a non-Jewish person, personally, he is not obviously obligated to designate Terumot and Maasros, and for that reason, if he happens to acquire a land of Israel, he himself is exempt. However, the land itself was not cancelled of its holiness as far as the potential of the land for Terumot and Maasros. For that reason, if a Jewish person have acquired from a non-Jewish person a piece of land in Israel, so this acquisition is not going to be considered a kibush yochid. It will be considered as he regain back control over a land that was never really, the holiness of it was never really cancelled. Since the previous owner, personally he was exempt, so therefore Terumot was not given. But as far as the land, the chiyuv, the obligation of the land still exists, and for that reason he will need to give, subject of the condition at what point he purchased the fruits from the non-Jew. So if the stage of the completion of organization and storage and took place when the Jew took over, he will be obligated to be mafresh Terumot and Maasros. On the other hand, in Syria, for example, as we have learned, it was a kibush yochid to begin with. So at the moment that a non-Jew have actually was belonged to him, and later a Jew have purchased the land from a non-Jew, he will be exempt from giving Terumot and Maasros, because by the fact that the goy was the owner, he was mafkia, he was cancelling the chiyuv of Terumot and Maasros out of the land itself. The second chapter deals on what type of food there is a duty to have Terumot and Maasros taken from it. So basically two conditions must be met. Condition number one, it must be food, edible food for a human being. If the food is strictly for animals, this food is exempt from Terumot and Maasros. However, if in times of hunger a human being will be consuming this fruit, so Terumot and Maasros must be taken. There is also, even in food itself, sometimes a person will primarily use the actual grain not for the purpose of consumption, but for the purpose of replanting them. So it is basically a commercial use that cannot be defined in context of Terumot and Maasros as food, and for that reason, certain grains that their primary purposes for replanting them, they will be exempt from Terumot and Maasros. However, if the individual had in mind for their leaves as well, for the consumption of the food part of those grains, they will be subject to Terumot and Maasros. The second condition, that it must be nishmar, guarded. Gardet, which means to exclude anything that belongs to Hefker. Hefker is an item that is honorless. For that reason, leket, shikho, and peyo, those type of gifts that each and every poor man is entitled to collect, they are hefker in connection of Terumot and Maisois, and they will be exempt from Terumot and Maisois. In a case that food that is subject to Terumot was mixed with a fruit that is exempt from Terumot, ideally he should designate the Terumot and Maisois from a different place according to the measurement of the fruit that is subject of Terumot and Maisois that is there in the mixture. There is also restriction to take fruits from Israel to outside Israel in order not to expose them to a rabbinical type of contamination, tum'o, that they have introduced to Eretz Ho'amim. And same way there is also a restriction of bringing fruit from outside Israel to Israel in order to prevent a confusion, because at the moment that you're bringing them to Israel, you cannot really eat them since they were exposed to Eretz Ho'amim. You cannot burn them because it's not a biblical type of tumor that deserves to be burned. If you brought them, you gotta wait for them until they will actually be exposed to a real tumor, a biblical tumor, and only then they will be burned. The third chapter is dealing about the amount, the percentage that is required to have in order for the tumor. So midoiraise, biblically, even chito achas piteres es kol akri, even one grain can take care as a tumor for the entire storage. However, rabbinically, they have introduced three shiurim. Ein ro'o, a stingy type, is echod mishishim, 1 of 60th, which is less than 2%. Ein beinonis is echod michamishim, which is precisely 2%. And ein ro'o, ein yofo, it will be echod mi'arboim, which is slightly more than 2%. However, if we're talking over here about certain type of food that the kohanim are not makpid, it is a very cheap type of fruit and they are not really after it, they're not excited about it. So then, even lechatchile to begin with, you can go and bring echod mishishim. When it comes to be mafresh the Terumot, it should not be done with a precise measurement. It should be done be'oimed. And lechatchila, to begin, ideally it should be min hamukuf. It should be taken, the actual Terumot, from the same place and from the same pack where the actual fruits are. It is important to note that in addition to the Terumot that a person takes from his harvest, he needs or to give to the Levi from the leftovers 10%, and the Levi will give from this 10% of the harvest he received 10% as well, and he will give it to the Kohen. And the 10% of the 10% that the Levi received, that's called Terumas Meiser. Sometimes Levi will be exempt from giving, because there is two types of Terumos. There is type of Terumas Meiser, and then there is a type of a Terumot. in certain times, which is called shibolim, before the actual wheat and the grains were able to be separated. So then there is no duty to give the Terumot on this particular item, but will be a duty to give Terumas Meiser. There is also a very, very specific order, and this is also being tied to a beautiful mimer that was introduced in today's Dvar Malchus. And the ideal order a person actually is designating the Maisois is in the following order. The first must be done Bikurim. Then comes the order of Terumot, which is talking about 2%. From the leftovers of the 2%, he is giving a Meiser to the Levi, and the Levi or he himself, today when we are not giving to the Levim, as we will learn later, he designate Terumas Meiser to the Kohen as well. So we have learned that there is also a way for a person to designate about 3% in total, which will be given directly to the Kohanim. 2% of them will represent the Terumot, 1% of them will represent the Terumas Meiser, and there is their entire process how a person will be able to declare in such a way that will make sure that the priority order is right and not wrong. The connection to the Dvar Malchus of this week is the Rebbe represents a very interesting pasuk. We know Bereshis, Bo Elokim es hashamayim v'ha'aretz, that the purpose of the creation is for two Reishis. Am Yisrael is called Reishis, and the Torah as well is called Reishis. And they are Kodmu, not only Kodmu in time, but Kodmu b'mailo, Kodmu in priority over the creation of this world. And the question amongst those two Reishis, the Reishis, which is called Torah, and the Reishis, which is called Am Yisrael, who has priority over who? So the answer was given in Tono de Velio, that the Rebbe quoted many times, that since the Torah itself is always referring Daber el Bnei Yisrael, this implies that the priority of Am Yisrael stands over the priority of Torah. For that reason, we see that both Reishis, Terumot nikras Reishis and Bikurim nikroim Reishis. Yet, the Terumot, which is a reference of Torah, as we have said before, it's a combination of two words, Torah Mem, the Torah that was given to Mem Yoim, and Bikurim, which are Reishis, because Kebikur bete'eno, beterem kaitz, or Isia v'Yiseichem, it's a reference to Am Yisrael that they are called Bikurim. And we see clearly that Al Pi Halocho, the order that first the Hafroshas HaBikurim, the Reishis of Bikurim comes first, and only then comes the Hafrosha of the Terumot.